CNN last night broadcast an interview with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, her vice presidential running mate, in what many had been looking very much forward to because it was the very first one where she had faced an actual reporter who was going to be asking questions after the convention in Chicago of last week. And one of the few times that she's faced any kind of questions from any reporter in months. Because as you may have seen in our previous episode, we talked about how she has been protected, how they have taken difficult things off the vice president's plate, how they have surrounded her with places where she could just have adoring crowds and all that kind of thing. So the question coming into this was going to be, is this going to be like a softball pro Harris thing that's kind of easy questions? Did you make her look good? Is it going to be something maybe like George Stephanopoulos from ABC News when he did the interview with President Biden, which by all accounts was probably the nail in the coffin that ended his presidential bid, when he asked lots of hard questions and lots of hard follow-ups? Well, as it turned out, it was pretty much a softball situation. In fact, in some cases, I might even argue it was more like a T-ball situation, to where they were really, really easy on her. And in a handful of times, and only a handful of times, when Dana Bash actually asked some hard follow-up questions when the answers weren't given, she never pressed forward. So what we saw on there just generally was that Kamala Harris and her vice presidential candidate are classic politicians, which means that no matter what the question that was asked, they gave the answers that they wanted to give. And frankly, sometimes it was kind of weird that what they were answering wasn't even related to the question that was asked. And Bash didn't seem to have a problem with that, probably because that's just how politicians are these days. So that by itself was very disappointing. The other thing, in the hour-long program, now bear in mind, this person is running to be commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces. The president has power in a number of areas, especially like in the economy. There's things that they can do, but they don't have that much power, because you have the federal and state. I'm sorry, the state and local governments have to do with a lot of those things. You have industry is not controlled by the government, so a lot of the things about economies and jobs and whatnot are actually handled by companies themselves, etc. But when you talk about the commander-in-chief in foreign policy, that is the number one area where the person that occupies that position has all of the importance in the world, because they have the sole decision-making power over how the armed forces is used, what our foreign policy is, etc. It's supposed to be that the Congress has the power to decide whether we go to war, but we've talked about too many times to count. That's not how it works in practice anymore. So if you're talking about the person you want to be in commander-in-chief, you should expect to hear quite a bit in how they would handle the armed forces, foreign policy, issues of war and peace, etc. And unfortunately, there was one question about foreign policy. Dana Bash said after a while, she said, let's pivot to some foreign policy questions. Well, it turned out there was one and only one. So we're going to have to extrapolate from what we've seen there. But there was still a lot to explain there. Just a lot to show us what we could expect from a commander-in-chief, Kamala Harris. So let's start, first of all, with the first question that Dana asked.
Let's talk about some foreign policy issues that would be on your plate if you become commander-in-chief. President Biden has tried unsuccessfully to end the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. He's been doing it for months and months, along with you. Would you do anything differently? For example, would you withhold some U.S. weapons shipments to Israel? That's what a lot of people on the progressive left want you to do.
Let me be very clear. I'm unequivocal and unwavering in my commitment to Israel's defense and its ability to defend itself. And that's not going to change.
Okay, well, that's pretty straightforward. Is there going to be any difference? No, there's not going to be any difference. So if you, and as you're going to see through all the things I'm going to put here, if you want to know what Kamala Harris's foreign policy going to be, it's basically just going to be the status quo. What we've seen over the last 3.5 years is what we would see for the next 4 years should she win starting next January. And especially on this issue of Israel, Dana did ask, to her credit, a good question, because this is an issue on the Democratic side itself, and certainly amongst many Americans. President Biden came under a lot of heat earlier this summer when he even dared to consider temporarily holding back some categories of ammunition, specifically 2,000-pound bombs from Israel, because they were bombing so much in some of the populated areas and causing so many civilian casualties that Biden held up but didn't completely stop that one category bombs, but not holding back anything else. Bombs were continuing to fall, plane load after plane load, over 500 military airlifts, the equivalent of about a 747, have landed and given stuff to Israel since this war started in October. A staggering number of ammunition and military weapons systems deliveries. And that doesn't even count anything that's come in by sea. So it's been an extraordinary event. But Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, publicly chastised Biden. I mean, like openly, just like, how dare you do that kind of thing. And apparently after that, Biden apologized. No. He went on and defended himself. No, that's not what I meant. Or, I'm really trying to help out. So even the one category, he buckled under the pressure from Netanyahu. And of course, that shows very clearly who's running the show in the United States. And it's not Joe Biden when it comes to American military power and decisions, policy decisions, even in the Middle East. And so you just have Kamala Harris right there saying that there's no change on that. And let me give you one example of one of the things that Biden did say, and this is from back in May, how he basically just repeats the talking points for the Israeli government, especially Benjamin Netanyahu. And we're going to see how that corresponds to what else Harris is. Watch this first.
There is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. And it's clear Israel wants to do all it can to ensure civilian protection. But let me be clear. Contrary to allegations against Israel made by the International Court of Justice, what's happening is not genocide. We reject that. We're going to always stand with Israel and the threats against its security.
So that's an important juxtaposition there, because what you just heard President Biden say was, forget about what all the rest of the world is saying about what's happened to the Palestinian people there, because it's not really a genocide. So just take that word and say none of it counts. Even if you want to say, yeah, there's a lot of Palestinians being killed, but it doesn't rise to that level. Zero concern whatsoever for the Palestinian people. He didn't even give him a throwaway line in that particular case, just dismissed the charge against Israel and then reiterated in the second half his fealty to Israel. Didn't talk about American national security, didn't talk about our interest or not interest in the area, didn't say anything about what's important to the United States and what outcome we want to get, only protected politically and diplomatically Israel against that charge, and then reaffirmed specifically their fealty to Israel. Nothing about the Palestinian people in that regard. Now, tell me if that doesn't sound a little familiar to this next comment from Kamala Harris.
October 7, 1,200 people were massacred. Many young people who were simply attending a music festival. Women were horribly raped. As I said then, I say today, Israel has a right to defend itself. We would. And how it does so matters. Far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed.
Okay, so she starts off there by going back to October 7th, as we say many times here, as though history started on October 7th, not even considering any of the things that happened in the summer before October 7th, where 200 or more Palestinians were killed by the Israeli Defense Forces, and all kinds of protests that were going on because of the terrible conditions that were being suffered by the Palestinians in both the West Bank and in Gaza. No mention of that. Certainly no mention of anything going back over the decades to 1948. None of that stuff even exists in her mind. Starts on October 7th. Then she specifies and reads out some of the Israeli talking points and these claims of, all kinds of rapes and all kinds of terrible things. And certainly that music concert that she was referring to, that's flat out true. There's no question about that. Lots of video on that. Some of the other things are a little bit more murky. And some of the claims that have come out of Israel about like babies being baked in microwave ovens and all kinds of stuff, there's actually no evidence of that. And even the Washington Post, New York Times have covered some of that a lot of the claims are way hyped up on the Israeli side. But you wouldn't know that from listening to the vice president. She repeats that. She repeats the exact number of Israeli people who were killed during that terrorist strike. And certainly that's an accurate number by all accounts. Most of those were civilians. Some of them were military. And a lot of them were done in horrific ways by terrorists. Flat out, 100%. It was a terrorist attack. There was civilian casualties, and so you don't have to embellish that. It stands egregious and horrific as it was. However, that's not the full story. So after specifying all of that stuff about October 7th and what the Israelis have suffered, then she has one single sentence that too many innocent Palestinians are being killed. That's it. That's all she says. And doesn't even mention the number. And the low number right now is over 40,000 dead and I think around 100,000 wounded. That's the low number. But some British sources, not Hamas, some British sources are saying medical doctors, a group, is actually saying the number's probably closer to 200,000 killed, especially when you estimate how many people are probably under the rubble. And of course, most of Gaza is rubble these days. So no one's going to know for years what that actual number is. But the bottom line is the low number is about 40,000, which she did not mention. She didn't say that the egregious cost on the children and especially the women and just how awful that is. No mention at all. And then she goes on to say, well, we're looking for a ceasefire negotiation. So I'm going to get into that in just a second. But what this shows you is that, yes, she is going to be a cut and paste from President Biden. And the same way that he showed fealty to the Israelis and complete deference to what Netanyahu has asked for, she is showing unambiguously she's going to continue following that same line. So if you like Biden's foreign policy, and many Democrats do, then you're going to like her foreign policy. But if you're an American and you're not as concerned about what a party does or doesn't do or who might elevate themselves politically at an election, but you're interested in what's going to be good for the United States, it's a red flag. It's a huge red flag because there's more than one thing can be true simultaneously. You can be pro-Israel. You can be I want to see them have peace. And the citizens and the civilians, the Jewish people that are living there and the Arabs, you can want them to succeed. And you can also want the Palestinian people to succeed. Those things are not mutually exclusive. And we have kind of made it that way, or it's not so much mutually exclusive as it is just ignoring the Palestinian portion of the equation. So they just want that. But America also has our own national security interests involved. And I haven't heard any of that from the Kamala Harris team. I haven't heard it from President Biden either. He rarely talks about what American national interests are, and they are not, folks, synonymous with Jerusalem. They're not. There are some overlap, but they're not synonymous. But I don't ever hear the distinctions between them. I don't ever hear him say, all right, I see what's important to Netanyahu's government, but this is what's important to our government as well. And in the areas where they diverge, we're going to insist on our foreign policy, on our interests, and we're going to pursue policies that protect our interests, that protect our people, that protect our armed forces. That's what a president should do. You want to be president of the United States? That's what you're supposed to care about, not just in Israel, of course, anywhere in the world, everywhere you want to look. The primary focus is supposed to be on protecting the American people, on protecting our freedoms, on protecting our economic viability. That's what you're supposed to look at every single corner of the world. First is to our country and second to potentially friends and allies in areas. There's no problem with that too. That's also not a mutually exclusive issue. It's not like so many wants to say today who love this internationalist view is to say, oh, you're a conservative. That means that you're also an isolationist, meaning that either you're doing whatever a foreign country wants and giving them everything they ask for, or you're an isolationist. And it's nonsense. It's absurd. It's insulting to even suggest that, because caring about your own country is what you're supposed to do. That's who we're supposed to be. That's who we're supposed to elect, is someone to take care of our interests. That's the very definition of the government of any country. Every country's supposed to do this. That's what Netanyahu's doing in his country. He's doing it the way he's supposed to. He's looking out for his interest. I respect that. Even if I don't agree with the policies, and I don't agree with many of them, but that's his job. His job is to take care of Israel, not America, certainly not Iran or Hezbollah or any of these other countries in the region. It's to take care of his country, and that's what he's doing. Why aren't we? Why don't we care about American interests first and help our friends where it makes sense to do that? And it's not. And we're going to see that view on Netanyahu has more significant ramifications than you may think. We'll talk about that in just a second. But let's get back here to what Kamala is saying here. So she was again asked very specifically about any potential policy changes and would there be any difference in their view towards Middle East. Here's what she said.
We have got to get a deal done. We were in Doha. We have to get a deal done. This war must end.
In the meantime,
and we must get a deal that is about getting the hostages out. I've met with the families of the American hostages. Let's get the hostages out. Let's get the ceasefire done.
but no change in policy in terms of arms and so forth.
No, we have to get a deal done.
Look, okay, now that you're seeing something else that I found rather distasteful about this, you can now see that the Harris team is the classic politicians, because they'll answer whatever question they want. She specifically said, "Are you willing to make a negotiation and to change any of the deals, change any of the terms?" And instead, she just said, "No, we're going to seek a deal." She didn't ask you if you're going to seek a deal. She asked you what you were going to do if any policy differences, and you just you ignored it and just said, "No, we're going to get a deal done." And let's look at that portion of it. What do you mean by get a deal done? Because if by get a deal done, you mean, which is things that have been going on here for months now, a ceasefire negotiations. We actually went above and beyond in what we have historically done and actually passed a UN Security Council resolution seeking a ceasefire deal that would be, put in place across the board, and that would allow people to start talking about having an end of war negotiations. You have to get a ceasefire before you can even talk about, ending the actual conflict. And so we say that is our national policy. We claim that that's what we're doing, but then you look at what we actually do on the ground, then you don't see any evidence of that. So you've had Biden say that a lot. You've had a lot of senior officials say that. You had Harris just again here say, we got to get a deal. Okay, folks, listen to me. If you want a deal, you can have a deal. If you want a ceasefire, we have all of the ammunition that we need, so to speak. We have all the leverage that we could ever need. We can do a ceasefire deal. We can tell Netanyahu, okay, it is no longer, it is not, and it never has been in our national interest for this war to just fester on, because it could expand and blow up and could end up getting us sucked into it. And we're in danger of that right now. So we're not going to go down that path anymore. You will either have a negotiated settlement, you will either have a ceasefire, we'll start with the easy one, or you're on your own. But you've already heard, she set the stage already. I'm not going to change anything. I'm not going to stop giving any ammunition or weapons. I will not use the leverage we have. Therefore, you don't want a ceasefire. Oh, sure, you may prefer it in isolation, but it would be great if you could. But you don't actually want it, because if you did, and if President Biden did right now while he's in office with the power, you would use that leverage to insist that we get that. And if you were the president of the United States who's looking out for the interest of our country, that is exactly what you would do. But we're not doing that, because clearly our emphasis and our focus is on doing what the Israeli leader wants, not what Americans want. Because the only people who benefit from this are the Israelis. The Palestinians don't benefit from it. No one else in the region benefits from it. No one else in the region, I'm talking about our allies and friends, even want this. They want the whole thing off the table. They want all the violence to be over. They want the Palestinian people who were suffering, they want that to come to an end. So everybody wants the thing to end but Benjamin Netanyahu. And based on all of his actions, the fact that he has, destroyed an Iranian embassy in a foreign country, violating every international law that you can imagine, assassinated the political leader, the chief negotiator of the side you ostensibly want to have a negotiated settlement with, and they keep saying that they're not going to make any negotiations on areas that they want, that they know the other side won't agree to because they don't want it. All the actions scream that Israel does not want a ceasefire. They want a military victory. They want to continue to roll and eliminate the whole Palestinian issue with military force. They want to quote, win the war and bring victory, even though that's militarily unattainable for all the reasons that I've mentioned in the past. They probably want war with Hezbollah and Iran, as long as they can draw the United States in, as long as they can suck us into it, because they know they can't take all that on by themselves. They don't have the wherewithal. And therein is your leverage. If you're the United States, you don't want a big war. You don't want to get drawn into a war for some other country, for crying out loud, whether it's Hezbollah or Iran. We don't want to do any of that. We want the thing to be over with. We have the leverage. We can tell Netanyahu straight up, if you take this policy here, if you take this course of action, you are on your own, like you were in the 1973 war, the 1967 war before that. We didn't fight for them then. And if you think that that's something you need to do, I'm not the leader of Israel. You are a sovereign leader. You can do whatever you want to do, but you'll do it without my bombs. And if you think that you've got the wherewithal and the capability and the forces and the weapons and the ammunition and the intelligence support and all that, if you think you can do it on your own, then that's a sovereign decision you can make, and you'll answer to your people for how that works out. But that's not where we are right now. And instead, we just are doing whatever the Israeli leaders say. Folks, I know that a lot of you don't like to hear this, but these are the facts. What I'm telling you here is the truth. And it's self-evident by the basis on it. Now, one other area here that bears talking about from last night, because it's really, really embarrassing, and that is when she was asked toward the end of this about a two-state solution.
A deal is not only the right thing to do to end this war, but will unlock so much of what must happen next. I remain committed since I've been on October 8th. To what we must do to work toward a two-state solution, where Israel is secure and in equal measure, the Palestinians have security and self-determination and dignity.
How many times is either President Biden or President wannabe Kamala Harris going to repeat that nonsense about a two-state solution? I think I showed you earlier this week a clip from President Biden's State of the Union address, where he again emphatically said two-state solution, etc. Now she's repeating nearly the same kind of thing here. But folks, if we're not even willing to use our leverage for something so easy to get as a ceasefire, what possible rationale does anyone genuinely think that she has any intention or backbone to insist on a two-state solution, which is categorically rejected by the Israeli government? And in case you're unclear on this, let me show you something that Benjamin Netanyahu himself said earlier this year.
And therefore, I clarify that in any other arrangement, in the future, the state of Israel have to control on the entire area from the river to the sea. This is what happens when you have sovereignty. This truth I say to our American friends. And I also stopped the attempt to impose us a reality that will jeopardize us. A prime minister in Israel has to be able to say no, even to the best of friends. To say no when you need to and to say yes when you can.
You see, he is focused on his national interest. In his view, a two-state solution is anathema. He won't even consider it. He has to control from the river to the sea, which, of course, perversely is what so many defenders of Israel point to when the Palestinian side says it as evidence that, oh my God, they want to wipe Israel off the map. But when Netanyahu says it and has the power to do it, silence, no problem. But again, that's his call to make. It's his country. Then he's the leader of it. So he's responsible to his population, to the people who voted for him, to decide whether they want to keep him or not. and he's responsible to them if he succeeds or fails. But why is it that the U.S. leader, whether it's the current one or the one that wants to be the next one, won't do the same for our country? He has categorically and in your face said there is no two-state solution. I'm not going to allow you to, quote him, impose upon us an outcome that we don't want. That's what he just said, straight up. That's just one quote. He certainly said it many times, and that's public, folks. What do you think is going on behind the scenes privately when he publicly just repudiates everything that the United States keeps saying about a two-state solution, and all of his actions confirm that is their path? Why then do you have a candidate who says, yes, it's a two-state solution is what we're going for, and we have to have it? No, you don't have to have it when you aren't willing to do what it takes to get it. It's a lie. It's a soft lie, if you want to call it that. It's self-delusion, if you would prefer that. Choose whatever dag you want. But what you see graphically in your face, graphically, there is no prospect that that will ever come to pass because we have the ability to insist upon it and we don't use any of the leverage. And instead, we just ask them, please change your mind, and they're not going to ever. Netanyahu has been in power since the 90s, and he has never said anything except absolutely no two-state solution. We've shown on this channel earlier on late last year, I think, was one of the ambassadors, one of the Israeli ambassadors was pressed by a British informer, interviewer. Would there expressly be two states? She tried to dance around and he kept coming back. One of the best interviews I've seen in months, actually. He wouldn't let it go until finally she just admitted, no, there is no two-state solution. Absolutely not, was her exact quote. And that again is public situation. And now then, this shows the weakness of our current leadership and our projected leadership. That even though we claim this is America's priority, a ceasefire and a two-state solution. And yet we have made ourselves hostages to this regime. And listen, that's just the one situation here that we're talking about. Dana Bash, for whatever reason, in this hour-long interview for the person who wants to be commander-in-chief, didn't ask anything about the Russia-Ukraine war. Didn't ask anything about the potential war in China, Taiwan, and what we may do with it. Biden has sometimes said that we would defend them. What does she think? Kind of important to know for the person that you want making the decisions in the future. Nothing about Iran or Hezbollah. Would the United States fight a war with them? What are the options? What would you do in these given situations? No hard questions on that at all. None. Not even easy questions. The only sole topic was the Israeli-Hamas situation. And something that's frankly, it's messy, it's hard, but it's not difficult to actually in place, to put your interest at front. You can't force the Israelis to do anything, but you can say, I'm going to take care of our interest, and then you're on your own to do. And now then you make them make the hard decisions. But as it is, we're not making them make any decisions at all. In fact, I can only imagine that behind closed doors, they laugh at us, at the United States. They have contempt for President Biden. How much more contempt might they have for Kamala Harris, who is just repeating the same things? And it's pretty evident that as commander-in-chief, that she's not going to be this strong person that so many on her side and her party want her to be. Maybe she can be on some other things, maybe social justice or some of these other topics that she's really passionate about. Maybe she would be on those. I don't know. But on the things that will matter to your life and the potential that we get sucked into a war, it's self-evident that she won't. She doesn't have the capacity because the guy she's wanting to emulate doesn't have the capacity or the willingness. I guess he has the capacity. He could change his mind any day, but he's not going to do it, or he hasn't done it so far. And there's no evidence that he's ever going to. And now then, when you have her expressly, Kamala Harris, saying, I'm going to follow in his footsteps, I'm just going to keep on going. If you like what we've been doing, then you'll like me. That's good for Israel. Israel certainly would love that. It's not good for America. And we're still to this day, still waiting to find out what Iran is going to do to Israel based on the assassination of Hania in Tehran, a month or so ago. They continue to claim that they're going to. So who knows what's going to happen, whether that's going to be a coordinated thing between Iran and Hezbollah, and that they're going to fire some of their more capable missiles, or they're going to try to swamp the Iron Dome system. I mean, we're still in a situation where war could come even before the election. And what is the president going to do? I mean, I don't know. It's going to be really hard to avoid going into war because he keeps saying overtly with the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, National Security Council, they keep emphasizing that we're going to defend Israel. And if Iran attacks, i.e. retaliates for the attack that was done to them, then we're going to do the same thing we, quote, did last time, which is referring to earlier when Iran responded after having their embassy destroyed, embassy building. And so why would Israel want anything different than the perpetuation of that? Because it literally extends the United States Armed Forces to the use by the Israeli leaders. That's the hard truth of it, folks. And again, if you're a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, you don't like to hear that. It doesn't sound good. But the problem is it isn't good. You're right. It doesn't sound good because it's not good. And yet that's our policy. That's what we're going down. And so what do you think the chances would be? So since Dana Bash didn't ask these questions, let me ask them. And I'll ask them of you because she wouldn't answer them anyway. That's obviously how she rolls. But let me ask you of you. Who do you want as your president? Do you want someone who will not even stand up to our ally? And do you think she's going to stand up to Vladimir Putin or to Xi Jinping or to the Ayatollah in Iran, Kim Jong-un in North Korea, or any of our other strong allies for that matter, who may want to use the United States to do their dirty work, who may want to use the U.S. Armed Forces for their purpose in the future, something that doesn't even exist right now, some condition, but has a strong, compulsive leader like Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't want that. And listen, this is no endorsement of Donald Trump either. We'll talk about that separately. We're talking right now about Kamala Harris, and I don't want a president that's going to be that way. I want a president that's going to stand up for us. And that means, like Netanyahu said, for once I'm going to actually say, I like what he said, and I would do the same thing in a similar situation, which is I will tell my friends no when I have to. And I'll say yes when we must. Why can't our leaders say that? Why can't we tell our friends no when it conflicts with our national interests? That's what we're supposed to do. That's what historically has been the case. And unfortunately, it is no longer the case. And you can almost extend this same thing into to somewhat lesser extent in the Russia-Ukraine war, because our fealty to Zelensky isn't quite as strong as it is as Netanyahu, but he's wanted all kinds of things. And even though it's delayed every time, he's eventually gotten everything, to include the F-16s, the Abrams tanks, other Western tanks, long-range missiles, Storm Shadow, ATACMS. He's literally gotten everything. And of course, it's never enough for Zelensky. He always wants a little bit more. And now he's saying, well, now I don't want just to attack some into Russia. I want all restraints taken off so I can attack anywhere. So far, Biden hasn't given that. But given that he gave in on literally everything else eventually, and we continue to just send tons and tons of weapons and ammunition up into Ukraine in ways that could potentially spark a larger war that may get us sucked into that, he almost never tells him no. And that's not what the American president is supposed to be. That's important for us to understand. So when you see these comments, and I've seen already in terms of last night, in terms of Harris's comments and her speech and acceptance speech in Chicago, people are talking about the substance of the delivery of the speech. She knocked it out of the park in Chicago, and she handled herself well. Didn't knock it out of the park, but she was good, and that's fine because of the way she responded. But you got to look beyond just the way, the delivery, and look at the substance of it. It's maybe never been more important than it is right now to look at the substance. And I want to see some of these journalists asking the hard questions that we're asking here on your behalf, the questions that could be life and death matter for us, that could be issues that of national security and our interest around the world are at stake. And you damn well better know that the person you put in charge there and give your vote can handle it. And I want to hear her say, and I don't want anybody to let her squirm out of it. I want to hear them answer these hard questions. What would you do on the Russia-Ukraine war? What if it's going to get into potential for nuclear war? What would you do? Even generally, even categorically. Are you going to let us get drawn into a war in the Middle East? What if China does do something with Taiwan? What would you do? Are you going to go to war with China? Is it in our interest to do so? How would you do it? What about the U.S. Armed Forces? It's not just the policy issues here. You're the commander in chief of the armed forces. Does she have any idea about the armed forces? Does she, just so you know, are they a good fighting force? And what goes into making a good fighting force? Do we need reform? Do we need to fire a bunch of the generals and elevate some new people? Do we need to change course in there? How are you going to fix some of the recruiting problems? These are the issues that really matter. Because if you don't have an armed force that can make good on your foreign policy, then you have another problem. And right now we do. We'll talk about that separately as well, because there's a much bigger problem with our armed forces and the disconnect between our policies and our capacities than you may realize. But I realize it. And as long as there's a Daniel Davis deep dive, we're going to make sure you realize it. We're going to show you what it is, because we're all about the truth here, even when it's ugly and unpleasant and difficult to hear like this one has been. But it's the truth. It's the reality. And you need to know about it, especially before we make a decision next November. Thanks very much. Appreciate you guys. We have coming up this afternoon a Daniel Davis deep dive intel briefing. One of the things that has turned into one of the more popular features that we have here. And also for those who are have joined our channel and have signed up for that, we're going to have a special Daniel Davis Deep Dive Army Huddle where you get a chance to personally ask questions. We directly engage with you. Gary's always there. So instead of just being behind the scenes, he's up front and personal with that. But that's exclusive content that you only get if you're a member. So please join up with that if you haven't. We'll look forward to doing that this afternoon at 3 o'clock today. So we will see you at 2 o'clock for everybody on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive Intel. See you next time.